In this video, we review Azure AD Connect staging mode. Hello everyone, I'm Travis and this is Geraldos. Azure AD Connect Sync only allows one installation of the application per Azure AD tenant. You can use SQL clustering on the back end, but that doesn't address high availability at the application. In this video, we're going to cover what Azure AD Connect staging mode is and how to use it. Before that, please subscribe, share with a friend, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Also, if you'd like to learn more about Azure AD Connect and synchronizing identities from Windows AD to Azure AD, check out my course on hybrid identities at udemy.com. The link is below. Let's get started. There are three use cases for staging mode: high availability, testing configuration changes, and migrating to a new server. Let's talk about high availability first. You can use the database that comes with the Azure AD Connect application, or you can use a SQL backend. The two reasons to use a SQL backend is for SQL clustering and to support more than 100,000 objects. But clustering the database doesn't address the single point of failure with the Azure AD Connect Sync application. There is no cluster option for that. Let's pause for a minute and consider the need for HA and Azure AD Connect Sync. The synchronization process runs every 30 minutes by default. With that, it may be tempting to consider AD Connect as being able to withstand a short or even extended outage. After all, it's just changes that are synchronized. However, some settings such as password changes for password hash synchronization and password writebacks happen more frequently, almost in real time. So an outage may not be that impactful unless you're the user trying to change their password. Staging mode allows us to create a second instance of the Azure AD Connect Sync application. A staging mode instance of Azure AD Connect Sync imports directory objects from the source. While in staging mode, however, it does not synchronize those objects to the destination Azure AD tenant. The point is, although we can't run AD Connect Sync in active-active mode, we should have a hot standby to rapidly fail over if the primary becomes unavailable. That's what staging mode gives us. Azure AD Connect Sync staging is not limited to HA. As mentioned at the beginning, there are two other uses for staging mode. Staging mode processes the data from the source but doesn't complete the last step of synchronizing the changes to the destination. This makes it a safe location to test changes such as advanced filters before rolling them into production. You can make the synchronization changes on the staging server and use the CS Export Analyzer tool to view the changes before putting them into production. Also, if you need to upgrade the server Azure AD Connect Sync is running on, staging mode lets you pre-stage the application before flipping it into production. Using a staging server also provides a backout plan if you run into problems. The primary can be re-enabled if the new instance of Azure AD Connect Sync runs into problems. There are a couple things to keep in mind when using a staging server. You have to keep the primary and the staging server in sync with synchronization settings. A change to the primary Azure AD Connect Sync server won't propagate to the staging server. A staging server will not run password sync or password writebacks. You also want to keep staging mode servers in a different data center or Azure region if used for high availability. And the hardware for the production and staging server should match. It's still doing the same work of reading from the source and applying the synchronization rules. It's just not taking that last step of synchronizing those changes to Azure AD. For the lab coming up, I have a new Windows Server VM for the staging instance. This is joined to the same Windows AD domain as the existing Azure AD Connect server. Let's get started with verifying our existing settings. Let's start by reviewing our existing production server settings before installing Azure AD Connect in staging mode. Since the staging mode instance is the second Azure AD Connect installation, I'll assume you understand the requirements of Azure AD Connect Sync because you already installed it once. You'll need to match the existing server specs. So for example, if the current version of Azure AD Connect Sync uses SQL because there's over 100,000 objects, you'll need SQL for the staging server as well. Make sure both the production and the staging server are on the same application version also. Here I'm on the existing server and I'll use the command get AD sync global settings, parameters, and then I'll select the name and value and sort by name. Let's see what version we're on. It's under Microsoft.synchronize.server configuration version. And here it shows I'm on 2.0.28.0. I suggest upgrading to the latest version if not already, and I've already done that in this environment. While we're on the existing production server, let's get the existing configuration. We'll need that to configure the staging server. So let's go and open up Azure AD Connect. And from here, we'll go to Configure, and then View or Export Current Configuration. And Next. This lists your current configuration. At the top is the option to export settings. Let's do that. This exports a synchronization policy JSON file that includes the date it was generated in the name. The default save location is in Program Data, App Connect. You can leave it there or send it to a different location. Save it. We'll need the file shortly. Close Azure AD Connect, and let's go back and copy that file we just exported. We'll just copy that. Now let's go back to our new staging server. And I'll just drop it on the desktop for now. Now we can install the new Azure AD Connect application in staging mode. But first we have to download and run the Azure AD Connect installer if you haven't done that already. Here we are at the download site for Azure AD Connect. Let's download. And once done, let's go into the download directory and run the install. So we'll start by agreeing to the terms. And next we're going to select Customize. Select the option to import synchronization settings. And we'll browse to that file we copied over. I placed mine on the desktop. You may have placed yours elsewhere. Wherever you put it, select it. Click Install. This will add the synchronization service to the computer. It may take a couple minutes to finish. Now may be a good time to pause and come back once it's done. Welcome back. Now that it's finished, we can run through some of the options. There are not many available when you import the configuration. User sign-in is the same as the source. You can change that if needed. Let's go to Next. Here we have to sign into the Azure AD tenant with the global admin account. Next, we'll add the enterprise admin account. This step will set up a service account on the local forest. You can add your enterprise admin account and it'll create a new service account for you. Or if you have an existing service account, you can specify that here. Let's create a new one. We'll select our forest and go to Next. This last step is important. The second checkbox, Enable Staging Mode, is what we want for this server. This will import data from the source, but not export it to Azure AD. That is, after all, what makes this a staging server. You don't want multiple Azure AD Connect Sync servers exporting data to Azure AD. That could be bad. Don't do it. Once ready and you've triple checked that staging mode is enabled, click Install. This could take a few minutes. This is a good point to pause and resume once finished. Once finished, you should get the confirmation complete message, and the third message indicates settings were successfully imported from the export file. That looks good. Now exit and let's verify the configuration. We'll use the Azure AD Connect configuration documenter to compare and verify the configuration. I'll have a link to this page below. Download the latest copy of the application and extract the zip file. And I'll extract it to the Downloads folder. This application works by comparing two sets of configuration, the source or production, and the staging or pilot. If we go into the extracted file, data, there's an example for Contoso. Under that are pilot and production directories. And under each one of these directories is a set of configuration files. We need to create a similar file structure for our environment. So let's go back to data. And under Data, create a new directory for your company, Seraltos for this example. And under that, we'll add two new directories, one called Pilot and one called Production. Next, let's get the configuration from the staging server and put that into the Pilot folder. Open up PowerShell. We're going to run the command get AD sync server configuration, specify the path to the output folder, the Seraltos Pilot folder for this example. That completed, let's go back to that folder. Now under Pilot, we have three folders with configuration settings from the staging server. We need to get the same data from our production server next. Go back to the production server and go to PowerShell. We'll run the same command again, get AD sync server configuration, but this time I'll specify a path in the documents folder. Let's go to the output directory. Now we have the three configuration folders. Let's copy them and move them to the staging server with the Azure AD Connect Documenter application. So here we are back on our staging server under the Azure AD Connect Sync Documenter, Data, Seraltos, and let's go back to Production. We need to paste those three configuration folders in this location. And to be clear, all we're doing is we're taking the same configuration from two installs of Azure AD Connect, placing our staging configuration in the Pilot directory and the production configuration into the production folder. Now that we have the production and staging configuration in the documentation tool, next we need to update the command file that runs the comparison with our organization file path. So let's go back to the Azure AD Connect Sync Documenter directory. Make a copy of the Azure AD Connect Sync Documenter contoso.cmd file. You might have to go to View and File Extensions. So we'll copy this. We'll paste it right back and change the name to indicate your organization name. Right-click and edit. And at the top, it indicates the relative path where it's going to look for our Pilot and Production folders. So we'll just change this from Contoso to your organization name. Save that. You can close it. Next, let's open up a command prompt. Navigate to the Documenter directory. Once in the directory, run the command file we just updated. This will generate a report that will compare the production and staging environment. Once finished, we should have a new report folder in the Documenter directory. There it is. Open up the HTML file. We can scroll through and look for variations between the two. You'll see them in red. This is a great reference, but it's a fairly lengthy list of settings. To show only the differences between production and Pilot, let's go back to the top and check the box to only show changes. This will show only differences between the two configurations. A lot of the items we're looking at now are like dates and user accounts. Even the staging mode setting is listed. Most of these make sense that they would be different. Review and update any settings on the staging server that should be the same as production. You'll need to re-export the config on the staging server and run the report again to verify the changes. That's great. Now our staging server is configured with the same settings as the production server. If you make any changes to the production server, The same will need to be done on the staging server. They won't keep in sync with settings changes. Now that our staging server is in sync, we can let it sit until it's needed. If there is a failure on the primary or we want to migrate servers, we can initiate a cutover once the production instance is offline. If it's a controlled failover, meaning the production version is up and running, start by going into Azure AD Connect on the production server. Here we are back on the production server. Go to Tasks and configure staging mode. Walk through the steps to configure the production server as a staging server. Once finished, there'll be 2 staging servers and neither are synchronizing to Azure AD. Let's fix that by going back to the new staging server. We'll open up Azure AD Connect. Go to Configure. We'll configure staging mode. Sign in as a global admin and uncheck Enable Staging Mode. Go to Next and follow the steps to disable staging mode on our new server. With that, we've created a staging server, verified synchronization settings match, and switched the active Azure AD Connect server to the new server. I hope this helps you deploy and configure an Azure AD Connect staging server. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.